The city skyline was bathed in the cold glow of early dawn, glass towers piercing the fog like silent sentinels. Inside one of these towers, a man in a tailored suit sat alone, his wrists shackled by cold metal handcuffs that glinted under sterile office lights. His gaze was fixed not on the world outside, but on the small child standing hesitantly across the room, innocent eyes wide with a mix of confusion and fear. The silence was thick, broken only by a whispered voice from somewhere unseen. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. No names, no explanations. Just a raw moment suspended between past triumphs and present despair. The weight of his legacy crushed him in a room where power meant nothing, and love meant everything he had lost. No one knew the man's name here, in this cold, silent room. He was just a symbol of a fallen giant. His empire once gleamed like the city outside, powerful, untouchable, revered. But now, beneath the surface, the cracks had shattered everything. He stared out the window, lost in a memory no one could see, the laughter of a daughter who had slipped through his grasp. He thought he could live without love. The voice whispered again, fading into the distant hum of the waking city. Yet that little girl standing so still and fragile was the one who would prove him wrong. The child didn't speak. She just watched him. This titan of industry, reduced to a man undone by his own choices. Her small hands clenched tightly, as if holding onto a fragile thread of hope. Outside, the city buzzed with life. But inside, time seemed frozen. The man's face was etched with sorrow, regret, and something else. A dawning realization that power meant nothing without love. In this silent room, an invisible line was drawn, a line that would change their lives forever. A sudden gust rattled the glass as the city awakened, reminding them both that life outside would continue regardless of the pain inside this tower. The man slowly rose, his movements heavy with years of defeat. The child took a tentative step forward, bridging the chasm of silence. The moment hung suspended between despair and hope, a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, there was a way back from this broken place. The cold office felt a little warmer, if only for a heartbeat. In the silence that followed, the man's voice cracked as he whispered, "I thought I didn't need love to survive." The child looked up, her gaze steady and clear. "But love," she said softly, "is what makes us human. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just two souls, raw and exposed, in a room that had seen too many battles, but now held a single undeniable truth. The empire was crumbling, but perhaps within that ruin, something new could grow." The story truly began long before the glass towers and boardroom battles. It began in a small, cluttered apartment where a little girl sat on the floor, her wide eyes watching her father stumble through another sleepless night. His dreams were grand, but so were his failures. Her mother whispered promises to herself, vowing this child would never follow the same path. "You will be different," she said, her voice trembling. The girl learned early that power was fragile, and love was scarce. Yet even in that dim room, the fire of resilience flickered bright, an ember that would one day ignite a destiny far greater than broken promises. Years passed, and the child grew into a young woman shaped by that early wound. Now, in a gleaming boardroom, she sat at the edge, turned away from the polished mahogany table, excluded by suits and voices that dismissed her. Her heart pounded not just with ambition, but with the fierce determination not to be overlooked again. Her past whispered its scars in every silent glance and unmet expectation. But beneath that quiet exterior burned a defiant fire, a promise that this time she would write her own story. On her terms, with no room for shadows. Meanwhile, in a small neighborhood store, a boy sat alone on a wooden crate, his eyes tracing the faces of strangers passing by. His mother knelt nearby, pleading with the shopkeeper for a job she desperately needed to provide. The weight of poverty and pride clashed in her voice, but the boy learned to carry the silence of sacrifice. This was their world, where dreams were whispered, not shouted, where love was measured in small acts of survival. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet endurance would become the foundation of a future far beyond the streets he knew. Back in the high-rise, the young woman stared out over the cityscape, the same skyline that once seemed so distant now within reach. But power was not given, it was taken, forged through sacrifice. She thought of the promises made in that tiny apartment, the nights spent fighting to be heard, the friendships lost to ambition's toll. Every sleepless night and every shattered relationship was etched into her resolve. She was more than the sum of her wounds. She was the storm that would change the skyline forever. The boy from the corner store stood now, hands clenched into fists, eyes burning with a quiet fire. The hardships he'd witnessed, his mother's struggles, the cold nights, the hunger, were not chains but fuel. He vowed silently to escape this world, to build something different, something lasting. Every moment of pain was a stepping stone, every sacrifice a brick in his future empire. He didn't know the road ahead would be lonely, that victories would taste bittersweet, but his spirit was unbreakable. This was the seed of ambition planted deep in a heart forged by hardship. The young woman launched her first business pitch in a cramped conference room, filled with skeptical faces. Her voice trembled at first, then strengthened with every word, fueled by the fire of her past. Sleepless nights had sharpened her focus, lost birthdays had hardened her resolve. She knew every no was a test of her will. Around her, the corporate world buzzed with calculated smiles and veiled doubts, but she stood tall, unyielding. I will prove them wrong, she thought. This was only the beginning, a climb where every step forward demanded more than she could give. Yet, the cost was invisible, quietly rising behind her confident facade. Meanwhile, the boy from the corner store had traded his wooden crate for a cluttered workshop, where he toiled deep into the night. Blueprints and half-finished inventions scattered around him, his fingers stained with grease and determination. Friends drifted away, unable to keep up with the obsession that consumed him. Love was a distant memory, a sacrifice made in pursuit of something greater. The nights blurred into dawn, and the victories, small breakthroughs in circuits and codes, were victories only he could appreciate. The price of ambition was steep, but he was willing to pay it, one lonely hour at a time. Back in the glass tower, the young woman's phone buzzed relentlessly. Invitations, meetings, deals, but also missed calls from friends, faded texts from lovers left behind. She glanced at the calendar, a birthday circled in red, one she would spend alone, buried in contracts and negotiations. Every achievement felt hollow without someone to share it with. Yet the drive to build, to conquer, pushed her onward. She was rising, yes, but at a cost she could barely admit, even to herself. The empire she dreamed of was growing, but so was the distance from everything she once held dear. The boy stood on the edge of his neighborhood one evening, watching distant city lights flicker like a promise. His mother's worn coat hung loosely over his shoulders, a silent reminder of sacrifice. He was leaving behind a world that shaped him, its struggles, its small victories. But the future was a battlefield, and he was ready. Alone, uncertain, and burning with resolve, he stepped forward, knowing that every win would come at the cost of loneliness. Yet he welcomed it. For ambition, he thought, is both gift and curse. At a high-stakes takeover meeting, the young woman faced a room full of power players, their eyes sharp, their voices sharper. She had fought hard to get here, but this moment was a crucible. Deals were sealed with cold words, alliances forged and broken in seconds. She felt the weight of every sacrifice, the nights alone, the friendships sacrificed on the altar of success. When the final handshake came, it was a victory, yes, but one shadowed by loss. The empire was hers to command now, but she knew the price was far from paid. The climb would only get steeper. Just when the young woman thought she had control, the floor dropped beneath her feet. During a late-night review, an unexpected email shattered her world. The business she'd fought to build was never truly hers. The contracts, the shares, the very foundation were controlled by unseen hands. Betrayal cut deep. The room around her blurred as her mind raced. How had she missed this? Her co-founder, someone she trusted, was revealed to be her estranged sibling, a shadow from her past who had played the long game. The empire was a fragile illusion, one built on secrets and lies. She felt the air grow thin, the walls closing in. Meanwhile, the boy's workshop felt colder, heavier. A trusted mentor, once a guiding light, had betrayed him, stealing his ideas and presenting them as their own. The betrayal was a cruel echo of the past, a painful lesson in trust and ambition. He stared at the broken plans scattered across his workbench, the weight of loss pressing down. The fire in his heart flickered but did not extinguish. He clenched his fists, knowing now that the journey was not just about success, but survival. In this ruthless world, every alliance was a gamble, every friend a potential enemy. The young woman's health, once a secret she guarded fiercely, began to betray her. Late nights blurred into dizzy spells and hidden hospital visits. No one in the boardroom knew the truth. Her illness was the final fracture in her armor. She couldn't bring herself to tell the team. She feared weakness, feared losing control. But the body has a way of revealing what the mind tries to hide. In the solitude of a sterile hospital room, she lay awake, grappling with mortality and the crumbling empire she'd fought so hard to build. The collapse wasn't just corporate, it was deeply personal. Back in the boardroom, rumors began to swirl, whispers of instability, of cracks in the empire's foundation. The once unshakable young woman faced rising dissent and doubt. Friends became foes, alliances shifted overnight. The betrayal, the secret illness, the mounting pressure, all converged in a storm threatening to engulf her. She stood at the edge, fighting to keep the empire alive, but the cost was crushing. Every decision felt like a gamble with no safe ground beneath her feet. The fall was inevitable, but how, and if, she would rise again remained uncertain. In a quiet moment away from the chaos, the young woman confronted her sibling, the co-founder whose betrayal had cut so deeply. Words were exchanged, raw and unforgiving. She saw not just the rival, but a fractured family history filled with pain and misunderstanding. Forgiveness felt impossible, yet so did surrender. The empire was more than a business. It was the battleground of their past and future. In that fragile confrontation, the true cost of ambition was laid bare, love lost, trust broken, and a legacy hanging by a thread. The collapse was no longer just external, it was in their hearts. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension, every breath heavy, as the moment of reckoning approached. The young woman stood tall before a sea of sharply dressed executives, their eyes cold, calculating, some filled with doubt, others with quiet resentment. "This company is more than profits," she declared, her voice unwavering despite the storm inside her. "It's the legacy of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every broken relationship." The room was silent except for the rustle of papers as ballots were passed and votes cast. Each mark felt like a cut into the flesh of her years-long fight. When the final count was announced, the deafening silence that followed felt like a verdict on her soul. The empire's fate was sealed, and with it, hers. After the vote, the bustling energy of the boardroom faded to an eerie stillness. The young woman remained seated, alone now, the echoes of the decision reverberating in her mind. Her phone buzzed gently, a message from the child who had become the light in her darkest hours. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you," it read simply. Those words, fragile yet powerful, cut through the fog of doubt and exhaustion. In that small, quiet moment, she realized the empire was more than power or money. It was a testament to love and resilience. Her victory wasn't just corporate, it was deeply personal. And somehow, amidst the uncertainty, it felt like hope. In the shadowed corridor of a high-rise, the boy, now a young man, stood watching his mentor approach, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement, a wariness born of betrayal, but also a grudging respect for battles survived. The weight of past losses hung between them, unspoken but understood. This was no longer about innocence or trust, it was about strategy and survival. Every step forward carried the heavy cost of scars earned and sacrifices made. Standing on the precipice of his own empire, he understood now. The road ahead would be lonely, ruthless, and demanding. But he was ready to face it head-on, no matter the cost. Back in the sanctuary of her office, the young woman faced her estranged sibling for the first time since the betrayal. The room was thick with tension, memories, and years of fractured trust hanging in the air. "We built this empire on broken promises," she whispered, her voice fragile yet defiant. "But maybe it's not too late to rebuild, together." His eyes softened, a crack in his hardened exterior. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered, a chance for reconciliation amidst ruin. The battle had been fierce and costly, but this fragile moment hinted at something new: healing. The fight was no longer just for power, but for family, for forgiveness, for the possibility of a future where trust could be reborn. She returned to the towering glass window, gazing out at the sprawling city skyline, bathed in the glow of dusk. The empire, flawed and scarred by betrayal's loss and sacrifice, still stood, a testament to endurance. The weight of power settled on her shoulders, tempered by the lessons of love and loss. Behind her, the child entered silently, a living reminder of the strength born from vulnerability. Together they stood facing the future, uncertain, daunting, yet filled with possibility. In the heart of chaos, they had found something far more enduring than an empire: each other. And with that, hope blossomed anew, fragile but fierce. Time passed like a slow tide, reshaping the young woman's life and legacy. No longer was she defined by the ruthless climb to power, but by the sacrifices that marked her journey. The empire she fought to save still stood, but it was no longer the center of her world. Mornings now began not with boardroom battles, but with quiet moments beside the child who had been her light through darkness. Each smile, each gentle touch healed scars invisible to the world, but searing in her soul. She had missed birthdays, celebrations, and precious milestones, yet here she was, stronger, more whole, reminded daily that legacy wasn't forged by wealth alone, but by love's quiet endurance and the courage to keep moving forward, even when broken. The boy, now grown into a determined young man, stood at the helm of a modest yet thriving company. Gone were the harsh streets and crumbling neighborhood. In their place were offices filled with hope and hard-earned innovation. His success wasn't marked by flashy headlines, but by resilience, the unyielding spirit that had carried him through poverty, betrayal, and loneliness. Every decision he made honored the sacrifices of his mother and the hard lessons learned. His empire was real, grounded in empathy and grit, a testament to the power of endurance and compassion. He understood now that true legacy was shaped not by titles or wealth, but by the lives touched and the courage to keep building, no matter the odds. Their paths converged in a quiet cafe, far removed from the glare of boardrooms and battles. The young woman and the man, once divided by betrayal and ambition, now sat across from each other, voices softer, eyes more open. They shared stories of pain, loss, and the unexpected strength that comes from facing the impossible. Their wounds were far from healed, but acceptance and understanding had begun to mend the fractures. Together they envisioned a future where legacy wasn't about dominance, but about forgiveness and rebuilding bridges burned by ambition's fire. This moment of fragile peace was a balm to old wounds, a reminder that even the deepest cracks can be filled with hope and new beginnings. In a quiet room far from the city's chaos, the child gazed thoughtfully into a mirror, her face reflecting both innocence and newfound strength. The journey had taught her that love was far more than a fleeting feeling. It was a deliberate choice, a steady commitment to stand strong, even when everything seemed to fall apart. The towering glass skyscrapers she once feared as cold and isolating, now shimmered with possibility and promise. She no longer saw herself as a mere witness to loss and power, but as a bearer of legacy, one defined by resilience, courage, and a fierce love that would shape every step of her path forward. The story's final chapter unfolded at the towering window of the skyscraper, where the young woman and child stood side by side. Below, the city pulsed with life, lights flickering on as dusk settled. The empire, once tested by betrayal, illness, and sacrifice, still endured, but transformed. It was no longer just a monument to power, but a living testament to love's resilience. The child's small hand reached out, fingers brushing the cold glass, a silent, unspoken promise of tomorrow and all the possibilities it held. In that moment, the true power of love revealed itself, not as a force to conquer, but as one that heals and rebuilds. Their story was no longer about survival alone, but about becoming whole again. In a dimly lit room where shadows stretched long and the air hung thick with silence, the young woman stood before a cracked mirror. Her reflection fragmented into jagged shards scattered across the polished floor, each piece telling a story of battles fought, of empires risen and fallen, of love lost and rediscovered. She traced a trembling finger across the surface, whispering softly, "I left the company, but I never left her." Outside, the distant sky exploded with bursts of fireworks, painting the night in fleeting colors. The city celebrated, oblivious to the quiet victories and sacrifices behind glass towers. This was her moment of reckoning, a delicate balance between endings and new beginnings, a whispered promise that her journey was far from over. The child sat alone in the vast emptiness of an executive boardroom, the polished mahogany table towering above her like a monument to decisions made and dreams deferred. Her small hand reached slowly, almost reverently, toward the massive chair once occupied by those whose choices shaped entire industries and lives. The room was suffused with the soft glow of twilight, filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, serene shadows across the polished floors. This chair was more than a symbol of power. It was a throne awaiting a new story, one forged in resilience, hope, and love. In her wide eyes shone fierce determination, a silent vow whispered between past and future. This legacy would be hers to rewrite, on her own terms, with courage and heart. Outside, the city hummed beneath a sky ablaze with vivid fireworks, their radiant colors reflecting off glass towers that reached into the heavens. From the window of her high-rise apartment, the young woman watched in silence, the distant bursts of light painting her face with flickers of red, blue, and gold. She breathed in deeply, feeling the bittersweet weight of loss and hope intertwine within her chest. The empire had shaped her, broken her, and rebuilt her stronger than before. But she no longer defined herself by its rise or fall. She was defined by something far more profound: love. The love that had saved her, held her, and would guide her forward through every uncertain step. The night air was still, sacred, holding space for endings and new beginnings alike. Beneath the soft glow of street lamps, a small hand intertwined with a larger, weathered one, as the child and young woman walked side by side through quiet city streets. Their footsteps echoed softly, synchronized rhythms against the backdrop of an ever-awake city. This journey transcended empires and boardrooms. It was a pilgrimage of connection, forgiveness, and an unspoken pledge never to let go. Around them, the city breathed stories old and new, shadows dancing across cobblestones and sidewalks. Their scars, etched by ambition, betrayal, and loss, were reminders not of weakness, but of the unyielding strength they now carried together. With every step forward, they carried the past with grace and moved toward a future illuminated by love. As the last sparkler fizzled and faded into the velvet night, the young woman and child paused on a quiet park bench, overlooking the city's twinkling lights below. The child's wide eyes reflected the constellations above, brimming with curiosity and unspoken dreams. The woman's smile was gentle, carrying the weight of their shared journey, a tapestry woven from loss, love, sacrifice, and hope. "This is just the beginning," she whispered softly, the city's pulse echoing around them. Their story was no longer a closing chapter, but a prologue, one filled with new promises and possibilities. Together they would write the future, not with empires built on power, but with legacies forged in love and resilience, stronger than any storm that came before.